Hello, I am Jared Thompson, the author of Sungrim. It's a tabletop skirmish role-playing war game. Um, Today, in this video, I'm going to be going over the core rules, and we're going to be talking about the process of writing the game, um, where the core mechanics of the game come from, how they work, and why I chose those mechanics, and just talking about the game in general. So let's get started. About the book. Sungrim, the core rules is 138 pages. Um, I don't have time or the money at the moment to do the art myself or to pay anybody else to do the art, so that's why it is artless at the moment. But hopefully that'll change in the future, depending on you guys. The artless version is now available for download on the um, my Ko-Fi, the Sungrim Ko-Fi, or the itch.io as well. And on the Ko-Fi, the artless version is now available for pre-order as well for a physical copy. The Sungrim core rulebook is a living rulebook. I don't really want to do additions as much as I can save it. You know, I want to like slowly up. I've got the core rules now to a point that I'm kind of happy with. I wanted to be more stuff in the core rulebook, but I've taken so long to write this. It's been 5 years. I started writing it in COVID in 2020, and there's been some scope creep and motivational problems. But I've got to the point now where I just want it to be out there and done and finished, so that I don't have to worry about it anymore. So yeah, I started writing it during COVID, and I just want out there. So we'll update it slowly as we go because there's only two factions in there at the moment. I'd like to add more, and there's a bunch of other things as well that I want to add to the core rules. The story and the setting of Sungrim. In the core rulebook, it's is very basic in general. Um, but like, it's the story is kind of an amalgamation of all of the role playing campaigns that I've done over the last like 15 years with friends. And I wanted a system that would allow me to marry all of those different systems together in a kind of cohesive way. Like I like some of the role plays that I did on like D&D, the Serenity role play system, um, World of Darkness. Like I made all of these games with my friends, and I just wanted to have them all in one place. So the the setting for Sungrim is a way to kind of like have all of those be in one place too, all of those stories. And I thought, and whilst I was going through that, I was looking at the D&D books, and I was like, the well, first I started playing. I played war games first before I started doing role play, and that kind of definitely had me in a mindset where I was looking at the D&D player's handbook, and I was like, the combat system in D&D is a war game. Like if you took out all of the role play and story aspects and you just looked at the combat, it is a role game. It is a war game. And that's looking through that book at that angle, I realized that it's a terrible war game. Like it's not basic. It doesn't have to be basic, but it doesn't flow well. as a war game. There's lots of weird edge cases, and it takes way too long. It's overly complicated. So I thought I wanted to design my roleplay system as both of those things, so that combat has a better flow to it. So that's why I wanted to have it this way. And in doing it this way, once I'd kind of got a ways through the core rulebook, I realized because I was treating those things kind of separately, treating it as a war game and a roleplay system, that I realized that you can use the Sungrim roleplay system for any tabletop war game. And it works. Like if you just took like how you make your characters and how like skills are used, we'll go over it later in the book. But if you just take that aspect of Sungrim, you could use it for Warhammer 40k. Like any any tabletop war game can be made into a roleplay system just by using the tabletop war game as the combat in the game or in your sessions. So you can carry on. So yeah, the setting of Sungrim is that amalgamation. The overview of the setting in the core rulebooks is very general, and I wanted to do that to give the players as much freedom as possible when creating their campaigns and their stories. So in Sungrim, you play as void drifters, which are people who can go in between dimensions, and each dimension is a setting in itself. So, one of those void spaces might be like medieval fantasy, and they can go to a different dimension that is, modern day, with the same character, and how that kind of like interacts with, what items and stuff they get in the stories. And I think that's one way that's the way in which I wanted to marry all of my different role plays together and be like, oh no, where this vampire from World of Darkness shows up in a 40k roleplay, and how would that look? How would that happen? So that's what the players play as, is a void drifter. Now with the overarching story of the setting of Sungrim, it is a kind of like psychological horror. It ended up becoming that because of how the settings are and how I wanted to how I wanted players to make characters. I realized at some point that that's where it was going. The Sungrim universe is full of the Sungrim universe takes quite a lot of inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft and that, like the Cthulhu mythos. But instead of the gods being eldritch horrors that don't care, they're pointed concepts. Instead of there being like, god of, Cthulhu, it's, the god of space itself and the god of time and stuff like that. In Sungrim, there are a few major Void Drifter factions. We'll quickly talk about those. The first one being the Drifter Council. The Drifter Council is one of the oldest Drifter factions, created by the first Void Drifter and his party for a mutual cause. The Drifter Council consists of only the most legendary and powerful drifters, and in its long life has never seen more than 25 members at any one time. Although individually strong, they can be outmanned, but despite this, still claim the largest territory. We have the Mythos. The Mythos are the eldritch gods of the multiverse and their husks. They still play a major part in the lives of the people and Void Drifters. They are fractured into many sub-factions and fight amongst themselves. This fighting called the War in Heaven. The Lost Cities. The Lost Cities are a collection of strange hive mind-like entities that grow with the collection of biomass. They keep and store items and knowledge from those that enter their labyrinth-like structures. Some Void Drifters say they are a type of husk. Others think they are like a Venus flytrap, but for Void Drifters. We have the Syndicate. The Syndicate are a non-human crime organizations that pride themselves on being the children of the gods. They do favors, and more often than not, expect more back than what they give. Earn. Earn are assassin bankers, an insular group that is invite only. They are background movers and plot makers and hide many secrets. The void spaces they claim tend to be the safest in the multiverse. The Inquisition, a governmental bureaucracy of non-drifters, imposing their rules on drifters, ironically, with the power of drifters that align with them. Sticklers for rules and laws, most Void Drifters look down on the Inquisition as weak and a nuisance and not worth dealing with. The Cult of Silver. The Cult of Silver follows and worships an enigmatic Void Drifter, one hungry for power and blood, the most aggressive faction of Void Drifters. The most aggressive faction of Void Drifter, their members seemingly strange and unhinged. The Grand Consortium. The Grand Consortium is the newest major faction of Void Drifters. Make their headquarters in the never-ending labyrinth, a void space that contains every possible combination of words in book form. Thus, it would contain every book that has ever been written, and every word that could ever be spoken. The Grand Consortium focus more on making the material lives better for the void spaces they claim. And each of those factions kind of play differently on the tabletop. So the Drifter Council is a low miniature count army, obviously, but they have a high quality of miniatures of like skills and miniatures. Then Mythos is more of a horde army, but they have resistance to conditions, and they have some very powerful units as well. The Lost City kind of like plays like an RTS, where you build units from buildings and you have to kind of like spread your influence, kind of like how the Zerg play in StarCraft, but obviously in tabletop miniature form, which is interesting. What's the next one? The Syndicate. They are strategic. They're synergistic, and they focus more on minions than on Void Drifters. They have like lots of different sub factions, and they have like favors that they like do, which are like special rules that are kind of like not out of the game, but it's kind of like you can choose them before the game starts, I think. Then we have Earn. They're about stealth and ambush, and they like remove miniatures from the table and change them from like civilian to assassin. This was kind of cool. Then we have the Inquisition. They are also focused more on minions as well instead of void drifters, but they have a higher focus on equipment, and they have like smoke grenades and stuff like that, which is super cool. Then you have the Cult of Silver, which is you sacrifice your own miniatures for power and to upgrade other miniatures, which is super cool. The Grand Consortium have their own kind of like mini game where they go around collecting like knowledge, and that gives them additional bonuses over the course of the game. So like those factions are quite fun, and there'll be more down the line as well when we come up with like um, other settings and specific void spaces with their own specific factions in them as well. Now get back up to the top. So now miniatures with Sungrim, or what was the scale of the miniatures in Sungrim? Sungrim was designed for use of 28mm miniatures, but Sungrim is miniatures agnostic. So each profile on the miniatures like stats will tell you what size base they're supposed to be on, and the rules are designed so that they're designed in a way to kind of ignore the physical miniature as much as possible to try and make that miniatures agnostic kind of like fairer across the board. Now the physicalness of the game. So like dice, we use polyhedral dice, so D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D20. Obviously, some role play games, quite a few role play games use polyhedral dice, but not many war games do. So I thought, why not use them? I think it'd be fun. Sometimes it's a bit annoying to like swap between the dice and that, but I think it should be okay. The play area, say that the minimum size table should be 2 foot by 2 foot, but you can go to a higher play area if you're using more miniatures or more points. Terrain, because the setting of Sungrim is how it is, and there's lots of different void spaces, you could use any terrain works. Even like kitchen appliances would be fine. It's like glasses and tin cans and stuff. We have the stat line there. With the stat line, some of the stats that are made by two or three of the other stats, if that makes sense. So prowess is mind plus body. Sungrim is a full information game because I think that's kind of like the fairest way to do it. So I like the idea of like you're supposed to give your opponent a copy of your party sheet of your army list, so that your opponent, with all of the rules written out, so that your opponent can see exactly what your miniatures are doing and exactly the points cost. So everything's really fair there. Measuring the Sungrim is in inches. Players are allowed to measure it at whatever time they want. And all distances are measured from base to base as well. Because I think, especially with the miniatures and agnostic rules and stuff like that, measuring base to base is definitely the fairest way to do it. Line of sight, all miniatures block line of sight. Friendly miniatures don't if you're in base contact with them, and I think that gives a really cool, some really cool strategies that you can come up with, like having a line of miniatures that have like shields in the front and ranged weapons in the back. So the miniatures with ranged weapons can shoot but can't be shot back from an opponent. I think that's a fun little tactic that you can do there. Units in Sungrim are just kind of like a combination of individual miniatures. So each profile for a unit will have the base size, and then all miniatures in the same unit must all take the same action at the same time. For example, during a charge action, all miniatures do the move action at the same time, and then the free attack action. Line of sight and checking ranges treat each miniature individually when using a unit. Unit coherency, that is, units fighting a group of multiple miniatures. When moving, treat each miniature independently, moving them up to the maximum movement. Miniatures in a typical unit stay close together. Before a unit makes a move or a charge action, the miniature must be within the unit's coherency, which is the distance measured in inches. The distance will vary between units. Yeah, so the coherency distance will change depending on the unit. Same with some of the other like stats of the unit too. All miniatures from the unit must be within the distance. Do not count vertical distance for coherency, only horizontal. If they are not in coherency, each miniature must make a willpower check. If failed, they must move in a way that restores coherency or close as possible. If they pass, they may move or charge as normal. When moving your miniatures, you may choose to move them in such a way that they are not in coherency at the end of the movement. So you can split the unit up a bit when you move. Like if there's not enough cover for everyone to hide behind within the coherency, you can move them in such a way that they're not in coherency. Units from rough ground, treat each model individually. It's the same for line of sight. Units and taking damage. Treat units as normal up to the point of taking damage. Instead of the miniature that is the target of the attack reducing the hit points, instead the miniature with the lowest hit points in the unit takes damage. If all miniatures have the same amount of hit points, the owner of the unit chooses a miniature of the unit to take the damage. And then acceptable casualties. This is kind of like the leadership of the unit. While fighting, some casualties are to be expected. When a unit has taken enough casualties to be below a certain percentage from the maximum at the start of the game, it is considered broken. And broken is a condition that we will go over later. A unit starts the game with 10. If a unit starts the game with 10 miniatures and its acceptable casualties is 50%, then the unit has only 4 miniatures left when it is broken. When a broken unit takes an action that is not a melee attack action, the unit must make a single willpower check using the highest soul stat in the unit. If the check fails, they gain the broken condition, and if passed, they may act as normal. So that is one of the that bit is one of the ways that I try to make melee weapons kind of like equal to ranged weapons, because you see in a bunch of different war games that the ranged weapons are stronger than melee weapons or melee attacks in a lot of games. So that's one of the ways that we try to bridge that gap, is that you can still attack with melee even when you're broken. And there's a bunch of other things as well that give buffs to the melee weapon. Yeah, dead miniatures. When a miniature dies, place a body token that is the same base size as the miniature in base contact, then remove the dead miniature. These don't block line of sight and can be moved over, but count as rough terrain. Yeah, because it's a war game and a roleplay system, I wanted to add a way into the war game system that kind of like represents that dead body and like taking items and stuff. So that is how we do that with body tokens. And because obviously this is a role play system and a war game system, you can loot items off of dead miniatures if you're just doing the war game. So then that opens up kind of like an avenue for list building. It's like, do you just have a basic guy running around that hasn't got any upgrades and he just loots stuff off of dead people? I think that's kind of like an interesting way you could build a list. Um, Move on to self-contained checks. So those are kind of like you've seen them in like D&D and other role play systems, like saving throws and stuff like that. It's very similar, but it's just cut up into the three main stats. You know, the mind, body, soul, kind of like stats there. Now the turn. The turns are Sungrim is a alternate activation game. So each miniature has an action stat, and that's how many actions they can take per battle round. And then you and your opponent go back and forth, each doing one action until all of the miniatures' actions are spent. But it does have a priority at the beginning of the turn and you roll off to see who gets the first activation for that battle round. And there's a bunch of different actions you can take: move, interact, which is like, you know, looting from corpses or interacting with anything on the in the mission. The attack action, charge action, prone action, which gives your miniature the prone condition, and we'll go over that later. The pass action, so you just give up the action and don't do anything and just pass to the next player, but you know, that still takes an action point. Any special actions, like using some traits and items and stuff like that, have like special actions on them that like will use actions to do special things. And then once all the miniatures on the board have used all of the action points, the next battle round starts, and all of the miniatures get their action points back. Movement. You can't move through other miniatures at all, friendly or foe. A miniature can only pass within 1 inch of an enemy miniature if it's charging. If an enemy miniature comes within an inch, if an enemy miniature comes within 1 inch of a friendly miniature because of a charge, they may choose to be sucked into combat, which case move the miniature. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit like Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth Battle Miniatures game, if you ever played that, where you can like suck other miniatures into contact if you get within a certain range. Force movement, so the spells, abilities, and items can cause a miniature to move. These don't count as a move action. If that miniature ends in base contact with an enemy miniature, it counts as forced combat. Forced movement may also be used to move a miniature out of combat, and that provokes attacks of opportunity. Now, attacks of opportunity are kind of like the D&D way of doing it, but I think there's some slight differences. You may make an attack of opportunity when an enemy miniature moves out of base contact or melee weapons range. Attacks of opportunity cost an action point. The attack occurs right before the miniature leaves your reach. Attacks of opportunity can only be taken with melee weapons. Now that's one of the reasons why melee weapons are better. But I think there is a trait that lets you take attacks of opportunity with a ranged weapon, I think. It's been a while since I wrote some of those rules. Movement in combat. Anytime a miniature moves into base contact with an enemy miniature is considered to be in combat. The two miniatures are locked together and the only actions those miniatures can take are the attack, pass, or any attack, move, pass, or any special actions. We've got jumping and climbing. Because we have a lot of like movement rules for like forced movement, there's also rules for falling as well. And obviously, because this is a role play system, we have to have stuff like that in as well. Charging. Miniatures may charge several enemy miniatures at the same time as long as that ends its movement in base contact or weapons range of all miniatures. Miniatures cannot charge enemy miniatures out of line of sight, not in line of sight. So that's another reason why having like 2 layers of miniatures might be a good idea. And also protects like hero characters as well. If in base contact or melee weapons range with a miniature, you may make a move action to reposition. You may move up to your full movement, but must remain in base contact or melee weapons range. If in base contact or melee weapons range with multiple miniatures, you may only move as long as you remain in base contact or weapons range with all miniatures. Then obstructions. Rough ground, it takes double your movement. That's simple. Okay, combat. Once a miniature is in combat with an enemy miniature, it may use a free attack action as part of its charge action, or on subsequent turns, spend one of its actions to make an attack action. Each miniature in the combat rolls a d20 and adds their prowess, then compares that number with other miniatures in the combat. The higher the roll, the higher the number wins the combat. If all miniatures in the combat roll the same value after adding their prowess number, it counts as all miniatures losing the combat. The miniature that wins the combat deals damage to a miniature in base contact or in weapons range with it and line of sight of its choice. If 2 miniatures from the same party roll the same value and win the combat, then the controller picks which miniature does damage. Roll the weapon's damage die plus the miniature's prowess. For example, a sword deals d6 damage and rolls a 4, and the miniature has a prowess of 5, so that makes 9. And then you get +1 to damage for each other friendly miniature in base contact with the miniature taking the damage. So, like if there's 2 other friendly miniatures, goes to, it gains +2, so that's 11 damage. And then compare the damage number to the opposing miniature's defense, so you take it away, and then that's how many hit points they lose. Ranged weapons can't be used in melee. You can't use ranged weapons to deal damage in melee. So that's another way that we make, that we level the power between melee and ranged weapons. Yeah. So winning combat. Once the damage has been allocated, the winning miniature the winning miniature's player may decide to push back the losing miniature 1 inch. And it tells you how to do that. If there are any miniatures touching them, they are also moved. The loser cannot move into base contact with another enemy miniature, and moving the miniature doesn't count as giving attacks of opportunity. Shooting is very similar. One way that we do make ranged weapons a little bit worse is that if you're the defending miniature and you win the ranged roll off, you can't deal damage back even if you have a ranged weapon. So that's one way that we combat ranged weapons being particularly strong. Terrain and shooting. If any terrain or miniatures are in between the shooting miniature and the target, that would cover parts of the target miniature's inhabited space, which is just like basically a circle or whatever shape the base is. It goes up. There's like an invisible space that goes up to the head of the miniature, and that's the inhabited space. Now, if there's anything covering that space at all, you get +2 to defense when defending against ranged attacks. Or if you can't see the miniature at all, but you can see a little bit of the base, or like a corner of the inhabited space is +4 defense. Items, each item takes up a number of slots. Miniatures have 5 slots for items that they can carry with them. Any 5 slots of items can be only 5 slots of items can be equipped at any time. When creating your character, you may choose to spend your starting creation points on any starting equipment. Miniatures only gain the benefits of items they have equipped unless the item says otherwise. You can loot items off of dead miniatures. A miniature must be in base contact with the body token. It takes an action to move any number of items from your inventory as long as you have slots to take those items. Yep, and then conditions. Blinded. Each condition does debuffs in some form or another. There's ones that make you completely invisible. There's lots of different ways to get conditions, whether it be part of a trait or a weapon or anything like that. Yes. Because Sungrim is a war game and a tabletop role game at the same time, we use the point systems that other war games use as experience points for the role play aspects of the game as well. So small games are about 500 to 1,000 points. They take about an hour to 2 hours. Medium games, 1 to 2,000 points to 2 to 3 hours, and 2,000 to 5,000 points, like 3 to 4 hours. Now, the games of Sungrim are like a little weird when estimating time, because it's really not the points that determine how long the game is, it's how many miniatures you use. Like if you have like a party of just one big miniature, obviously your turns are going to be a lot faster than your opponents, and that'll speed the game up. So if you had like a miniature that's like 5,000 points, the game would go a lot faster. Yeah. Each faction has different ways to build parties. So like some factions, like I think the Husk faction doesn't have to have drifters to have minions, whereas the freelance drifters do. Yeah, so I'll read out the things here. So this is the freelance drifters kind of like faction rundown. So Void drifters are beings which have the power to walk the void between dimensions, and this power feeds their privilege that void drifters feel like they have. Void drifters as a people are lonely, as they are different, outsiders from the rest of creation, and thus must look after themselves. Void drifters accumulate power from dimensions they visit, such as information, items, and protection. Sometimes the fastest way to get those things is to attack other void drifters. Void drifters are a people that have found a way to break out from their home void space and can now cross the void into other dimensions. There are many ways to become a void drifter in the multi-universe, from an evolved ability that a person can be born with, which is very rare, to finding a legendary item that allows them to walk the void. The most common way is in the drifter's life that the most common way that is in their the most common way is that something has happened to the drifter in the drifter's life that has broken them to their very core. Something that makes them think, I wish not to be here. I want to go home. Not every time someone thinks one of these things in one of those situations, I lost my place, they become a void drifter. Void drifters are incredibly rare, being on average a 1 in 100 billion. Got in a god complex is an unshakable belief in characterize a god complex is an unshakable belief, a characterization of consistent inflated feelings of personal ability, privilege, or infallibility. Most Voidrifters are not a part of any faction or organization, but only out for themselves. To survive in the harsh reality of the multi-universe, they still need help. Forming parties with other Voidrifters, whether out of convenience or a shared goal, these Voidrifters are called freelance. Yes, that's kind of like the freelance Voidrifter faction there. And you've got ways to build your characters, lots of different traits and items, and skills, traits and spells, items, special weapons. The husks are spiritual beings, beings of consciousness, symbolism, and power. They are separate yet still connected to the gods of the multi-universe. Husks are for reality. They are the reason reality exists and the method by which it operates. Given purpose and allowed personality, they fulfill their given purpose and are obligated to do that job, whether it is exacting the laws of physical realities, or as a message doing the will of the gods. Husks are called that insultingly by Voidrifters, the ones that know of their existence, referring to them as referring to the emptiness of the physical body of the manifested husk, being a container for a spirit, but also the lack of personality husks have when given power and purpose by the gods, and the lack of agency they have in fulfilling their obligations. As beings of spirit, husks do not require anything to sustain themselves, but they do need energy produced by mortal souls to fuel their apotheosis into more powerful states. Husks are able to reach out and capture the souls upon death. It is almost impossible to drain a soul of all of its energy, and to do so will destroy it and go against the will of the gods. Husks reside in a place called the Underworld, a place that physically shares the same space as reality, just out of phase with it. When in the underworld, it is impossible to interact with reality, but you can see and hear all that happens there. When husks are created, they are void of anything other than purpose, but still have the capacity for personality. Husks are inherently curious and watch mortals from the underworld, picking up on emotions, behaviors, copying them, and influenced by what they see. Husks have husks have a very hierarchical existence to the gods from which they gain their power and purpose. The hierarchy is shaped like a family tree, with Grim, the creator god, and Mother, the goddess of chaos, at the top. The generations of gods and husks create created directly from them, would be the first generation. And if the first generation created another husk, husks are created nameless, but can be named by another of a lower generation. This must be done by a god or husk that creates them, or in a direct family line. It is considered a great insult to name a husk that is not a descendant from you. A husk create a husk a husk's name comes in two forms. Either a direct name that is given purpose of either a direct name of the given purpose, giving that husk more power over things or concepts like light or watcher, for example. The other form is a normal name that a mortal may have. These names are generally reserved for the creation of new gods or powerful husks, where personality and individuality is required for the purpose and obligations. Husks are limited not just by hierarchy and purpose, but territory and ideology play a big part of Husks' existence. Being creatures of purpose, they try to fulfill that purpose, and the stronger and more powerful a husk, the less other husks are necessary. It might take multiple lesser husks to produce a light for a single candle a mortal was lit, or a single named husk may have enough authority and power for all the lights in a city. Husks of similar power will sometimes fight between themselves to be the one to fulfill their purpose, sometimes gathering into parties to protect their territory. Being spirit, husks' physical bodies represent their personalities. However, much they have being spirit, husks' physical bodies represent their personality. However, much they have much they have. My eyesight's terrible. Following symbolism, for example, a husk that likes to listen to secret conversations of mortals may have big ears, or a husk that witnesses a sad event might permanently have tears in their eyes. Whether it is hierarchy towards an ancestor god or the choice of an individual husk, during the war in heaven, when the son rebelled against the father, this split the gods into three factions. Those that follow the Father, creator of the universe, those that follow the tortured Son, and those seeing an opportunity to abandon obligation and purpose entirely, the fallen, hated by all, that do follow purpose. And that's the Husk faction. Again, they have lots of traits, and their special um, faction rule is that when a non-husk miniature dies within 12 inches, they get a soul token, and then they can use that to upgrade their units, which is super cool. Then we're going to skip all of that and go straight down. There are rules for vehicles as well that both factions can use. That's after the husk section. Get all of this here. We'll skip all of that. Go straight to the roleplay section of the book. If it wants to load. Yeah. There's 6, there we go, we have rules for the terrain. Extreme temperatures, acid rain, poison rain, high gravity, sandstorms, lightning, electrocution, anti-magic fields. There's so many different types of hazards. We have 6 missions. They're base missions in the core rulebook. Right. So GM section. Telling you all the normal stuff. What Game Master is. Role playing in the multi-universe. Skills. Here we go. Now, I wanted to have skills in Sungrim be more open than some other roleplay systems. So what I've done is have it be like a tier system, and basically let the players choose whatever skills that they want to have for their character. So there's no like fixed skills like in D&D. It's a lot more open than that. And we encourage the players to pick skills that they would have in their like backstory as well. And the way that skills work is there are different tiers for each skill, and that tier represents a dice or a combination of dice, and then you roll that skill. So here's an example. To know if you succeeded or failed using a skill, the game master decides how hard they believe the set task. For example, a character wants to pick a lock on a door. The game master decides that the lock needs a proficiency tier of veteran 6 to pick. The player has a proficiency of Adept, which is a d6, in lockpick, so would roll 1d6, needing a 6. But one of the other players decides to help, giving them +1 die tier bonus for rolling, so 2d6, needing a 6 to unlock the door. And there's lots of different negative, like, buffs and debuffs to skills for rolling those dice. So if your health is less than 50%, or you're doing a rushed action, like if you're trying to do a skill action very quickly, or if you have no tools for that action, or you're in an environment that would hinder you, those are all -1 dice. But if you have help or you have time to do that action, it's a +1 dice. And also if you have a speciality in that specific thing as well. So that's how the skills work. Purchase skills. Like I said, experience, progression and experience in Sungrim. This is where I feel like Sungrim is a lot different than other roleplay systems with roleplay. Is that Sungrim doesn't go with the classic, giving you experience for enemies defeated, even though it does do that a little bit, or like story arcs or anything like that. Sungrim uses two systems together to award you experience based on your character's character development. So those two or three systems. One of them is the vice and virtues. So you choose one vice and one virtue from a list, and then at the end of the session, or at the end of the kind of like quest or story arc, the game master will, you'll sit down with your group and you'll all decide whether you think your character has played into that aspect of your character's personality, and whether or not you think that the character has changed their perspective on that thing, and that's how you gain experience. But also there'll be some things that happen to your character during play that may cause your character trauma, and that's an optional from the GM. So if something like Eldritch Horror Abomination happens to you, the Game Master might just give you some experience points just for, taking part in that. And also there are 14 questions, 7 good, 7 bad. These are like deep questions that you answer as your character, and those answers, along with the answers from your other party members, help the game master to come up with a story, or to write a story that directly affects all of the characters. So one example, we'll read the example that I've got here. For example, with the question, what do you fear the most? You shouldn't answer this question with something like clowns or spiders. You should try and think of something deep and meaningful, like I fear trusting people, or I fear my own strength. This way your game master can invent interesting scenarios where multiple players have conflicting views on a subject. For example, one player has I could not sacrifice myself, and during play, and one I could not sacrifice myself. And for example, one player has I could not sacrifice myself. And during play, let a child die that he could have saved at the chance of sacrificing himself. This may conflict with another player's question, like, I could not forgive letting a child die. This triggers both characters to reevaluate their worldview. One has let a child die, and the other must reevaluate their friendship. Because of this encounter, could that person change? and now sacrifice himself, now knowing what could be lost if he didn't change? Could the other character now forgive him for his poor judgment? Please remember these questions are not set in stone and are supposed to change. You will receive experience points regardless of your choice, and try to be aware of your character's personality and make choices that make sense for them regardless of your own views or ideals. Now, with these, because of these systems of earning experience, it will happen in game that in the roleplay that some characters will earn more experience than others. It's not going to be D&D where you all earn experience at the same rate. There will be some scenarios from one mission to another that hit more characters deeper than others, and there'll be conflicts within the party, and that's all. There's all a point there. The system is like that on purpose. No, regardless of like how you might feel left out. But I think that's the point of roleplay. Is we should be role playing scenarios, and it's the experience that you share with your party, not the gaming of it, not the power that you gain from those experiences for your character. Sure, we all want to be powerful, but that's not the point. Okay. Next, yeah, and there's the little table. Again, experience. It's 4 ways: vice, virtue, fortune, questions, trauma, and combat. Then we have downtime activities and training and research and those types of things, creating items. And there's the roleplay items, how expensive they are, certain places. Traversing the void. The void. Imagine the multi-universe being stacked hexagon tiles, each hexagon being a universe packed within it. Each hexagon may be almost identical with what it contains to its neighbor, or absolutely different in every conceivable way. Between those stacked hexagons is the void, a strange place where all things are eroded by energy. Staying there is an assured slow death. Drifters have evolved the power, or sometimes found it, to travel this place, although it may be for short periods of time. Void spaces are 50 feet wide and 30 feet tall hexagons that have a 30 feet wide platform that appears around them. They glow swirly blue colors. Each void space is a universe contained. The platform around them appear in relation to the void drifter and their connection to the void. Entropy. The gods of the void and the goddess of entropy are somehow linked. Being in the void slowly strips the body's physical form. The more energy that is used, the more that energy disintegrates the body. Spell casting is dangerous in the void. The energy used to power the spells to change reality builds up within the body, tearing out at moment of release, can detonate, whipping up winds of entropy to violently disintegrate the caster and anyone nearby. All the void spaces stack around a single point known as the core. This is where the Drifter Council make their headquarters. When the Void Drifter leaves a void space, they enter the void on the side closest to the core. Navigating the void. Groups of void spaces are called a section, and each section may consist of only a handful or thousands of void spaces. Each section is generally named after a specific void space or faction that controls that area. In each section, one void space is considered the linchpin for that section, and all other void spaces are mapped in reference to it. The three values of The three values are then mapped to each void space. The number of void spaces away from the linchpin of the section, a number of void spaces starting with the closest, a numbered void spaces starting with the void space closest to the core, going in a clockwise direction around the linchpin. Height of the void space in reference to the linchpin. Off the beaten path. If a void drifter were to step off into the void away from the platform, they would float weightless, unable to regain their footing, and slowly disintegrate into nothing, ripped apart painfully by entropy. Void walking in the void. Trying to void walk within the void ends in failure and a hollow, empty feeling of non-existence that frightens the void drifter. Enter and exit. When a void drifter enters a void space, they place the hand on it. They will appear in a random threshold somewhere within that void space. That is not being observed. To leave a void space, a void drifter simply wills it, regardless of where they are, creating a doorway to the void. And we have, in the core rules here, we have a little section on building void spaces, and some examples, and some just some key words for each section to help you maybe come up with ones yourself. Also, section on NPCs and quests, just to give examples of and some ideas for you if you're a game master running this. Yeah. And then there's the character sheet. I have the little tear so that if you are just doing the war game, not the role play, you can easily just cut the sheet there, and this top half is just what you need, and that's it. So yeah, I think Sungrim is a combination of all the kind of things about war games that I like as well. As I've been playing war games since I was 9, and then role playing since I was about 13 or 14. So this book is just everything from those kind of games, everything from those things that I like, or things that I would want to change, and it's just a culmination of those things. Even the way you build characters with traits is very similar to the old. The characters feel similar to the old Warhammer Fantasy. Where you could build those crazy characters that have lots of synergistic items and magical items and abilities and stuff. That's why I wanted to keep that over. So Sungrim does feel a bit hero hammery, but it's also a role play, so it will feel like that because you're playing role play characters. It's going to feel a bit like that. So anyway, thank you for watching. Links to the pre-order and the rules in the description. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.